Something is happening across the United States and Europe. It's a quiet revolution, but it's not taking place on the streets or in the halls of power. It's happening in our homes, on our phones, and in the private thoughts of millions. For centuries, faith was the bedrock of society. Today, that bedrock is cracking, and this isn't some slow academic drift. It's a massive change happening right now in our lifetimes. The question isn't if society is becoming less religious anymore, it's how fast is it happening, and why. Just think about this for a second. Back in 1972, only about 5% of Americans said they had no religion. By 2007, that number had tripled to 16%, and today, the number of religiously unaffiliated adults in the US has skyrocketed to nearly 30%. For young adults, the numbers are even more stark. Recent surveys show that around 43% of the youngest generation now identify as having no religion. It's a cultural earthquake that's emptying pews in churches, synagogues, and mosques, and it's fundamentally reshaping the identity of the Western world. The UK has already crossed a major threshold. People who identify as non-religious now outnumber self-identified Christians. Now, that doesn't mean they're all strict atheists, but it does show a clear and dramatic shift away from traditional faith. A similar story is unfolding across Europe, in some cases even faster. This isn't just a trend, it's an explosion. So what's really behind this unprecedented rise of unbelief? Let's break down the powerful forces from the smartphone in your pocket to the political battles on your screen that are fueling this massive shift. Look, a shift as big never has just one cause. What we're seeing is a perfect storm, a handful of powerful forces that have completely rewired our relationship with faith. To get why so many people are walking away from religion, you have to understand how our world has been completely remade over the past 50 years, and especially the last 20. It boils down to three main drivers: the rise of the internet, our intensely polarized politics, and a deep shift in our social values. For almost all of human history, your religious beliefs were basically set by your zip code. Online forums, social media groups, and YouTube channels became virtual sanctuaries for people having a crisis of faith. Skeptics who felt totally alone in their communities suddenly found out they weren't. They could share their doubts and ask tough questions without being judged, finding solidarity with thousands of others going through the exact same process. This digital exodus created a network effect. The more people left and shared their stories online, the more it normalized the process for others. You believed what your parents, your neighbors, and your local religious leaders taught you. Information was walled off. Challenges to what you were taught were rare, and usually came from inside the faith itself. Access to other ways of seeing the world was limited, if not totally impossible. And then the internet blew the doors off everything. Suddenly, with a few clicks, a devout teenager in a small town could access the writings of famous atheist thinkers like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens. They could find detailed scientific explanations for the origin of the universe that directly contradicted their Sunday school lessons. They could find historical and archaeological evidence that challenged a literal reading of their holy book. The internet didn't just give people answers. It gave them questions they never even knew they could ask. But it wasn't just a library. For many, it was a lifeline. This new freedom to think critically outside the box of traditional authority was something previous generations just didn't have. Let's make this real. Take a story like Sarah's, which is an archetype for how this happens. Sarah grew up in a loving, devout, evangelical Christian family. The church was the absolute center of her social world: Sunday school, youth group, summer Bible camps. Her faith was genuine and a core part of who she was. Then in college, A professor assigned a book about how the Bible was historically put together, but animosity spills over, and religion gets caught in the crossfire. For some, political ideology now provides the sense of identity, community, and moral purpose that the Church used to. The lines have blurred, and in this hyper-partisan world, many have been forced to choose. And more, they're choosing their political values over their childhood faith. The data is dramatic. Among American liberals, there are now more religious knowns than there are Christians, a complete flip from just a few decades ago. People aren't just leaving the church. Many feel like they're being pushed out by a political machine that co-opted their faith. She got curious and started doing her own research online. She fell down a rabbit hole, spending hours reading about textual criticism, the influence of Mesopotamian myths on Old Testament stories, and the political drama behind the Council of Nicaea. What started as simple curiosity spiraled into a full-blown crisis of faith. The simple certainties she grew up with started to crumble. Feeling like she couldn't talk to her family, she found a subreddit for and for the first time, she read stories from people who had walked her exact path. They described the same internal conflict, the same fear of disappointing their loved ones, and the same feeling of intellectual freedom on the other side. It was a lifeline. Over the next year, her faith just eroded. She didn't believe anymore, but she had found a new community that understood her journey. Sarah's story isn't some rare exception. It's a story that's playing out millions of times over in our digital world. The second major driver, and it's a huge one in the United States, is the toxic marriage of religion and partisan politics. Over the last few decades, we've seen a specific brand of conservative Christianity fuse itself to the Republican Party. This alliance, often called the religious right, has made political identity and religious identity almost inseparable for a huge chunk of the population. Political scientists like David Campbell have documented how this happened. Their research shows that as the Republican Party became more publicly tied to conservative Christianity, many politically moderate or liberal Americans started pulling back not just from the politics, but from the religion itself. For young people who are more likely to hold progressive social views, the connection became a deal. When they saw religious leaders endorsing political candidates or claiming partisan fights were God's will, their conclusion was simple. If that's what religion is, I want no part of it. This has created what sociologists call affective polarization. It basically means we don't just disagree with the other side anymore. We have a gut-level dislike for them. And it's not just about people leaving religion because of politics. For some, political ideology now provides the sense of identity, community, and moral purpose that the church used to. The lines have blurred, and in this hyperpartisan world, many have been forced to choose. Let us be real. Rules written thousands of years ago for a completely different world don't always line up with modern life. When a church teaches that homosexuality is a sin, that women can't be leaders, or that birth control is wrong, it pushes away a growing number of people who see those positions as not just outdated, but deeply unfair. And more, they're choosing their political values over their childhood faith. The third major force is a huge gap that has opened up between traditional religious teachings and modern social values. Increasingly, people are looking inward for their moral compass, relying on reason, empathy, and their own experience instead of ancient texts or clergy. This turn towards individualism is a hallmark of modern secular societies, and it's a fundamental challenge to the top-down structure of many religions. In both Europe and the US, societies have become way more liberal on a whole range of issues over the past 50 years. Views on LGBTQ+ rights, gender equality, and personal autonomy have changed dramatically. For many organized religions, this has been a massive challenge. For younger generations like millennials and Gen Z, this disconnect is especially sharp. They've grown up in a more diverse and accepting world. They are even willing to ignore their ethical convictions, just to stay in an institution that marginalizes people they know and love. The choice becomes clear. Either abandon their own beliefs about equality and fairness, or abandon the institution that condemns those beliefs. This really points to a bigger shift in who we trust to tell us what is right and wrong. Increasingly, people are looking inward for their moral compass, relying on reason, empathy, and their own experience instead of ancient texts or clergy. This turn towards individualism is a hallmark of modern, secular societies, and it's a fundamental challenge to the top-down structure of many religions. In the US, recent data puts them at around 5 to 7% of all adults, making up about 17% of all knowns. They don't say God doesn't exist. They say, we don't have the evidence to know for sure. They make up about 6% of US adults and around 20% of the knowns. Okay, so it's really important to understand that these knowns aren't all one big group. The term, which just means people who tick the none of the above box on religion surveys, is a huge umbrella. These folks make up the silent majority of the knowns. A full 19% of all American adults, and over 60% of the religiously unaffiliated. The rise of the knowns isn't primarily an explosion of strict atheism. It's a mass exodus from organized religion. People aren't necessarily ditching spirituality, but they are rejecting the institutions, the dogma, and the labels that have always come with it. This group is incredibly diverse. Some are basically atheists who just don't like the label. Many others are apatheistic. They just don't think about religion or see it as relevant. And crucially, a lot of them still hold some spiritual beliefs. A 2024 Pew report noted that a majority of all knowns, driven by this group, still believe in God or a higher power. They just don't connect that feeling to an institution. To get the full picture, you have to break it down. First, you have the atheists. These are people who actively say, I do not believe in God. Second are the agnostics. They argue that we just can't know if God exists. But the biggest and most fascinating group by far are the nothing in particulars. This is the key takeaway. The rise of the knowns isn't primarily an explosion of strict atheism. It's a mass exodus from organized religion. People aren't necessarily ditching spirituality, but they are rejecting the institutions, the dogma, and the labels that have always come with it. And one more thing is pouring gas on this fire. Something scholars call the collapse of the middle. For most of the 20th century, the American religious scene was dominated by mainline Protestant churches. Methodist, the Presbyterian Church, has lost over half its members since the 1980s. The United Methodist Church has shrunk by millions. Overall, the share of Americans who call themselves mainline Protestant has cratered from over 30% in the 1970s to just over 10% today. The forces driving this technology, polarization, and our evolving values aren't slowing down. The explosion of unbelief isn't a passing phase. It's a defining feature of the 21st century. For millions, the age of inherited faith is being replaced by an age of questioning, an age of searching, and an age of figuring things out for themselves. This stuff is obviously super personal, and it's changing all the time. What do you think? Have you seen these forces at play in your own life or community? Let us know in the comments below, but please keep it respectful. And if you've got something out of this breakdown, do us a favor and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. Will new, secular ways of building community rise up to take the place of the old ones? They represented a kind of moderate faith. It was culturally respected but not too intense or politically aggressive. It was the religion you could belong to without it consuming your entire life. That middle has all but vanished. Since the 1970s, these mainline denominations have been in a freefall. And as that comfortable middle ground has disappeared, the landscape has split. The options have increasingly become a very fervent, politically charged evangelicalism on one side and no religion on the other. For people who aren't drawn to an all-in high-intensity faith, the off-ramp to becoming a nun is now the most obvious path. There's no longer a comfortable middle ground, and millions of people are filling that vacuum by simply walking away. So when you put it all together, the story of rising unbelief is really the story of our world being completely transformed. It's a story about the internet breaking down walls. It's about politics poisoning the well of faith. And it's about our own sense of right and wrong evolving past ancient rules. This isn't just about empty churches. It's about what comes next. What will bind our societies together? Where will people find meaning and community? Losing religion doesn't automatically mean losing morality, community, or purpose, but it does mean we're all navigating a new, uncharted map. The forces driving this technology, polarization, and our evolving values aren't slowing down. The explosion of unbelief isn't a passing phase. It's a defining feature of the 21st century. For millions, the age of inherited faith is being replaced by an age of questioning, an age of searching, and an age of figuring things out for themselves. This stuff is obviously super personal, and it's changing all the time. What do you think? Have you seen these forces at play in your own life or community? Let us know in the comments below, but please keep it respectful. And if you got something out of this breakdown, do us a favor and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world.